All right, welcome back. It's still Galaxy. Today we trust you enjoyed that particular graphics, showing you how a bone gets fractured and also gets healed. We'll start this conversation from Abuja. We have Dr. Emeka Moma standing by. Good morning to you, Doctor. Thanks for joining us all the way from Abuja. Let us talk about fractures before we get into dislocations. Fractures, I know there are several types. Can you break it down to us when we talk about fractures so we can actually get like a background knowledge of it, really?
Uh, uh, um, Essentially, when we talk about fractures, there are different type of fractures. But let's first of all let's define what a fracture is. So, a fracture is when a bony fragment or piece of bone gets separated and broken. That's essentially the definition of a fracture. There is also what is called other type of fracture, like a compound fracture or a simple fracture or a hairline fracture. But essentially, the definition of a fracture is when the bony fragment is broken or cracked. Often than not, the more severe ones is when the bone actually leaves the skin. That's usually what's defined as a compound fracture, and it's usually very serious and very severe. I'm having a bit of a challenge with my earpiece this morning, so bear with me.
All right, how about dislocation? Excuse me. Since you've defined what fractures are, what fracture is, well, how about dislocation? What exactly is dislocation? Give us a background knowledge to that, please.
Likewise, we would like to define what a dislocation is. So, a dislocation essentially is when you have two bones that are usually come together that are separated, either a simple separation or a major separation, a shift within the joint region where there's a separation. That's what a dislocation is. This usually does happen within joint regions. And can also be an emergency when there's a dislocation or shift that is that's pushing against a nerve or blood vessel. That's essentially the definition of a dislocation.
All right, Doctor, thanks for giving us a background information. Just hold on a second. We'll come to you in the next few seconds. We have to take a very quick break. Just stand by, Doctor.
So this video is going to talk about bone fractures. So bones are usually healthy and strong, and they sustain us with movement, etc. However, due to some form of trauma, vitamin A deficiency, low bone density, or being old, bone fractures can occur. Bone fractures can lead to tears in blood vessels, which carry nutrients to the bone, which will cause some problems. But our body obviously has some mechanism to repair bone fractures. Now, bone fractures itself can be categorized into four parts. Can be classified by the position of the bone ends after a fracture.
All right, welcome back. Dr. Moma is still standing by in Abuja. He just gave us a background information of what fractures and dislocations are. Take it a bit further now, talking about fracture. If you do have a fracture, for a simple one that could happen at home, what should be the first aid thing or the first aid treatment that you should be given to someone who just had a fracture in the home?
Yes, so essentially, like I defined, a fracture is the break or crack of the bone. The first thing you want to do is first of all visualize where that fracture is. Hopefully, that if that bone is not sticking out of the skin, the first thing you want to do is first of all apply some cold compress to that location first. Then after that is that you now want to now either called a splint. You want to apply what's a splint, so you can take a piece of stick or any firm, long, rigid piece of object and splinter. So you want to tie that stick between between the points of the fracture. usually you want to give us between the ends of the fracture, and then now use a tape and tie to keep to align that bone to a straight position. If unfortunately that fracture is sticking out of the skin, that's usually more of a medical emergency. You want to now again apply a cold compress, wash the blood, and then try and splinter, and apply pressure to where there's a bleeding, and rush that person to the nearest hospital or emergency service.
Final notes before we'll let you go. You talked about fractures and talked about how simple or how complex or compound they could be. But in a case where some people feel that hospitals don't cure bones, they go straight to the traditional bone setters and healers. Let's talk about their operations when we talk
Yes,
about
setters.
fractures and dislocations. How helpful are they? Are they really recognized for treatment of fractures and dislocations?
I'll tell you my practice for many years. I've come in contact with patients who have gone to traditional bone setters for particular bone issues. I'm in no place to say that they do not work, because I do believe that there's an ability to realign the bones, and it's a fairly simple thing about being trained enough and experienced enough to know how to realign the bones. So I believe that I do agree that there's meaningful benefits of traditional bone setters. But where I tend to have a bit of a disagreement, or I won't sanction it, is where you can't verify to what degree there is a bone fracture. Like I defined, there are simple fractures, stress fractures, compound fractures, hairline fractures, commutative fractures. So when we cannot tell the severity of this fracture, it becomes a bit questionable to really measure the benefits of if a traditional bone setter can actually align these bones. You can have compound fractures that are so far apart that you need a surgical procedure to first of all align it in place, staple it before you actually think of allowing the bone to grow back together. So there are meaningful benefits, I believe, but I think that we need to use a little bit of wisdom. Thank God for modern technology to guide which direction we go. Traditional bone setters do have some skills, but I think with a bit of guideline, it can help to differentiate between when you go to traditional bone setters and when you do not.
I thank you, Dr. Emeka Moma, medical practitioner, joined us from Abuja to look at fractures and dislocations this morning. Here in Lagos, we have Dr. Tuyi Mebawonju, a public health practitioner. Good morning to you, doctor.
Good
Good morning.
Doctor. It's good to have you
Nice
again.
to see you.
Same here, doctor.
Okay, sir, we're looking at fractures and dislocations, but we want you to talk to us from the public health angle, seeing that this is something that's quite common, but a whole lot of us look away. Let me give a personal experience. Now, I have a cousin who got wounded, but she felt like it wasn't something serious, and today she's limping. So, in a situation where there are cases like this, and it looks like society isn't giving much, I feel some of these people, some people take this advantage to actually be beggars on the streets simply because they feel, okay, since I got a bit of maybe fractured bone or a dislocated bone, I can just use this to my own advantage. What's the society doing in regards to bones naturally?
Yeah, very important because bone is something we talk less about, honestly. And we need to start looking at the bones from the public health perspective and the health of bones. Because the foundation of most fracture is a bone that is not really healthy. Okay? Especially when you're talking about fractures at later age, Now, bone supports our frame, it gives us the frame. Bones give us mobility, we can be able to do sports, enjoy movement and all that because we have bones. And apart from these two functions, bone is also a big store for a lot of important minerals for vital functions of the body. The calcium is there. Calcium is essential for the functioning of the heart. Calcium is essential for the functioning of the muscle. Calcium is essential for blood clotting. And we also have phosphate there, Those minerals are stored in bone and they are mobilized and used by the body, and some of them are returned back as the hormones of the body choose to function. So it becomes important for us that we need to have a healthy bones if we are to function properly, if we are to mobilize those minerals for use, if we are to even be able to partake in daily activities and maintain our erect posture. But what we'll be saying that if you look at the fractures and the causes of fracture, unfortunately, most of these things causing unhealthiness of the bone are preventable. That is the beauty of it, they are preventable. But we still see quite a lot of death happening. What are these things? Look at road traffic accidents, for instance. Road traffic accidents leads to about 1.2 million deaths worldwide yearly and 50 million disability. And then out of all these 1.2 and 50 million figures I've given, about 80% of them occur in developing world, Nigeria inclusive. And the cost is so immense that as far as much as 1% of GDP of Nigeria is between 370 to 400, just about 400 billion. So if you are looking at about 1% of that being lost to bone-related thing, then you start opening your mouth and wondering. Thirdly, we're experiencing what we call transition. People get older, they live comfortably, and then there's less exercise, which we'll come to later. And then the chance of having osteoporosis, which is the thinning of the bone, especially postmenopausal women, old people, the chance of them having osteoporosis is getting higher.
What's osteoporosis?
That's thinning or loss of bone mass.
Okay.
You know, because once the bone mass is lost, then the person is prone to fracture.
When you say the bone mass is
There's
lost,
a thickness. There's a thickness deciduous of every bone. Okay. Once the thickness, when the bone mass is lost, then the bone becomes thin and it can be prone to fracture. Thirdly, should anyone now have fracture or injury or broken bone or disease of the bone, the cost of maintaining that disease of the bone or fracture is immense. The period of disability is longer because now if you have to put person on a splint or whatever procedure, it's a long time, minimum 8 weeks. Okay? So, and you can imagine somebody being out of work for 8 weeks, and then who's going to cater for the person? Where is the money going to come from? Fourthly, the specialists on bones, which we call orthopedic surgeons, in the whole country of 180 or 170 million people, or 200 million we call ourselves now, just 350 surgeons. 350 surgeons. And of course, you know where they will be. So the challenge of the fact that if you are in a remote place, if you are in your village in Useluku or Nimo as the case may be, or a remote place, even in this Lagos, the chance of you getting in touch with somebody who's going to give proper advice on bone, on how to manage a bone fracture, for instance, is limited. And we also know the challenge and the complication of bones. You see a lot of people bent, some limping, some with funny leg, bow leg and all those things, and some with shorter legs, shorter hands. And then, you know, you just start imagining that this must have been a consequence of a poorly managed fracture, or probably, you know, a bone health that is not properly, you know, managed. So, if you put all this together, you then start to understand the public health importance of a fracture, the public health importance of maintaining good bones, and what we need to do to ensure that from childhood we start putting the perception and the education for a healthy bone so that you can live a healthy adult life.
Okay, let us take Dr. Ali Mayowa. He's a senior registrar at the Department of Orthopedic and Trauma, University College Hospital in Ibadan. Good morning to you, Dr. Mayowa. I just want to get something straight. When one has a fracture or maybe even a dislocation, I want to find out, does it completely heal? Can the person get back to normalcy the way he was just before the incident occurred? I'm using myself as a case study. I don't know, I still feel pain around my wrist. My wrist was dislocated when I was much younger, but over time, it still moves. I feel the bone moves a bit and sometimes it comes back to normal. How can you explain this to me? My wrist was dislocated.
Thank you very much for having me. In orthopedics and trauma, one of the goals of management of fracture is early return to function. You want to ensure when managing this patient that you present them back to work. That is what we call restoration of function in orthopedics, then rehabilitation. Rehabilitation takes you back to work. But before you get to that, when you manage patients with fractures, there are what we call 5 R's of fracture management. The first thing is because a patient with a fracture who have been one that suffered from trauma, the first thing you want to do, the first R there is you want to resuscitate the patient. You want to ensure that there are no other injuries that are concomitant with this fracture. Like you said in your case, you had dislocation at your wrist. There might be some other injuries that happened at the time of that. You can have ligamental injury happening in the same time you had that fracture. So we want to resuscitate you and make sure there are no other injuries. The second R is we want to reduce that fracture, because most fracture, when they occur, there will be a displacement. One of the end of the bone will have gone in one direction, the other one has gone in another direction. We want to bring them together end to.
All right, our doctor seemed to have frozen, in quote. Dr. Ali Maiwa is a senior registrar, Department of Orthopedic and Trauma at the University College Hospital in Ibadan. We'll try and get back to him in the course of the show. Okay, doctor, having listened to Dr. Maiwa, he talked about, being sure that other issues are not really, tempered with when there's a dislocation. The doctor in Abuja also talked about the first aid treatment one could get. But over time, we'll find out that some people, when you have a bit of a dislocation or maybe something mild around the bones, they're quick to recommend massages and using of all sorts of ointments and all of that around the region. I want you to talk about it.
Again, sincerely, what we probably need, what we mostly need now is that there must be a proper education. There's a role you have to play in terms of managing a fracture or a bone problem. Because for me, I'm looking at the perspective of bone health. There's a role the health practitioner needs to play. There's a role for that of government. Of course, you know that when you massage a place, what you're trying to soothe the bone. But you must be able to be sure that you are not having, a compound kind of fracture that can actually damage a nearby vessel, a nearby nerve, or a nearby muscle, cause it further damage. So, but if you are talking about a mild or, maybe a fracture that is not complete, then probably that one might be useful. But the first thing is that when you are trying to apply the first aid, you must be sure of the extent of the fracture. And of course, normally the first thing they do after relieving your initial pain is to probably ask for, an X-ray to look at the extent of the fracture and look and check the different function of the affected part to see whether there's a loss of function and what might needed to be done in addition of aligning the broken bone. So that is it. So, but again, we shouldn't always assume that once there's a fracture, once I massage it, once I take it to that man at that corner, once I do this, it will always go. We don't need to, if we assume that, and you have a disability as a result of that fracture, especially if you are younger, by the time you get older, you will constantly experience disability or problems, especially if the fracture is close to a joint. You may even have stiffness of the joint, which you call arthrodesis, stiffness of that joint, and the loss of function of that. Because the thing that distinguishes us is the ability to move those joints to do a lot of work. So that is definitely there. So it's important for us to get a proper education and have proper knowledge of what should be done and what cannot be done in terms of managing fracture, and then see a medical person.
But then, how do you differentiate dislocations from fractures? I mean, like you rightly said, you feel a twist or you feel a pain somewhere, and the next thing is you just want to go for a massage. How do you know when is the fracture, when is the
You see, for me, the only way you can know whether you're having a fracture or dislocation is to do an X-ray.
Okay.
You know, because it could be a crack. If there are small bones, let's look at this joint for instance. There are tiny, tiny bones there that could crack, and you'll be thinking you're having dislocation. So, X-ray will tell you clearly whether it's just a dislocation or a fracture. You know, and then in that wise, the doctor can be able to take the appropriate decision and action. You know, in reducing it.
Okay, so the best way is to go for X-ray.
X-ray becomes so important to distinguish whether you are dealing with a dislocated bone, especially close to the joint, because you can only talk about dislocation close to the joint, whether you are dealing with dislocation or whether you are dealing with dislocation and fracture, because the fact that you have dislocation does not mean that the person cannot have fracture. The person can also have some other structure around there, like ligament, like nerve being compressed or being injured. So in that case, you know, treatment then becomes important in that respect.
All right, then, do we have, I know that just as we have, I mean, the human body, you have a sickness, it could have some kind of symptoms or have some kind of relations to this. When it comes to bones, does dislocation or fracture have any relation to other kinds of sicknesses? I mean, is it possible to have a heart issue and then it could one way or the other lead to bone issues?
Now, what we know from the public health perspective is that there are some conditions of the body that could predispose to dislocation or even fracture, that look to fracture, yes. For instance, if there's a problem with the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, you know, where there's problem with metabolism of calcium, you know, the person can actually have, you know, fracture easily. Some cancers, let's look at prostate cancer for instance, can spread to the bone and easily lead to fracture. People with osteoporosis, thinning of the bone, and osteopenia, you know, they are prone to fracture. It becomes even more challenging if the person is old, and then they have fracture of the hip, and then which increases their mortality, and you know, and becomes more confining to the family. Yes, people with sickle cell also, and people with osteomyelitis, infection of the bone, can also be prone to fracture. That is why if somebody is not complaining of injury and has fracture just like that, maybe by falling, okay, then you need to look at some of other conditions that could be associated with that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, most of the causes of this fracture are actually preventable. I've mentioned RTA and trauma. But even in the design of our house, of our offices and all those things, one could fall easily and then, you know, in the process have a fracture. So it becomes important that in the design itself, we take into cognizance the fact that we don't want anybody to fall and then have a fracture. Then at the level of the public health setting, people must be advised on their risk of their whole, health of their bone, the risk of the health of their bone, so especially at certain age, especially when it's having some condition. And specific questions should be asked in relation to that. Are you having frequent bone pain, this and that, you know, so that. And then when we're doing checkups, most of the time we tend to run away from the one that has to do with bones. Okay, we just look at the heart, we don't know that bone can also be prone to diseases and fractures and weakness because of age, because of additional sickness. For a woman who is postmenopausal, for instance, it becomes important that she keeps a second eye on her bone, because the loss of that estrogen weakens the bone, and at the end of the day, she also is prone to simple fracture. For those who are obese, of course, when they fall and they have the fracture of the head or the femur, it becomes a big issue in terms of the cost, the expertise, and the length of treatment and disability that may accompany such.
Okay, but looking at bone fractures right now, and you know, I need to know, because the doctor didn't really finish talking before we went off. can the bone heal completely and it will be back to normalcy? And then again, sometimes because some people are off work for, sometimes 2, 3 months just because they had some major accident, and you see all sorts of, bandages and POP used on them. For those ones, what's the likelihood that they would not have issues over time even when they recover?
Now, the one I know about bone is this: when there's a fracture, that means the breaking of bone. The first thing is to reduce the fracture and ensure alignment where the bone touches.
Okay.
There are cells in the body that will go and replace, cause mineralization where the bone, calcium is moved to that place, and then all other constituents are moved, and then the bones is joined together and formed back. Okay, there are cells in the body. But you know that the integrity of that bone will not be like the one that has never fractured. So the risk of, if you are going to have a fracture and the person should fall again, the risk of that place breaking is higher than any other place.
Okay.
So it's important. Yes, it can heal. You can try to, with physiotherapy and proper management, you can restore function, because the key thing is to restore function. Okay, you can restore function. But let's appreciate the fact that the bone can easily get broken from that same point where
It was broken
before.
All right, we're still expecting your message. A lot of people are trying to call, but just send us an SMS and interact with us on our social media platforms using the hashtag Galaxy Today. Good morning, sir. I am Emilia from Bayelsa. Please, what kind of medication should one use for dislocations?
Again, for me, I really want to give education about bone health. I mean, that is the first thing. Now, we see the important function of the bone to the body. Apart from maintaining the frame of the body, it allows mobility, allows to move, do sports, do everything. And in addition, it's a store for a lot of minerals that is very useful to the body. Now, maintaining bone health starts from childhood. We must be able to appreciate that. And there are 3 key things, from the knowledge we've gotten. Exercise, regular exercise of the body, strengthening your bone. So you cannot live a sedentary life and you're thinking that you're going to have a strong bone like somebody who is quite active and does exercise. It's very key. Then we've seen the use of vitamin D and calcium, because these are very essential for the bones. For us in this part of the world, we tend to have a lot of vitamin D from early morning sun. So but if your lifestyle is such that you stay at home, you are in powder, and the woman is covered all the time and hidden in the house, then availability of vitamin D for her will be suspect. And in that wise, you need to think of vitamin D and calcium for that person. So then the other aspect is about some of their habits. If you are in the habit of smoking tends to weaken bone. So for us, we tend to advise against smoking so that you don't weaken your bone. So now, the third thing is that we need to have a national plan on bone. We can't just wait and say that somebody has a fracture and then we now start talking about bone, or somebody has a dislocation, we now start talking about bones and joints. There must be a clear-cut national plan, because the implication for the health system, for disability adjusted life years, for access to even proper care, for deformity is very, very important. And then you see, because there are few surgeons dealing with bones, we tend to see charlatans, bone setters, this and that, coming in, and then with suspicious outcome in terms of treatment. But let's be frank, some of those claims they make, the traditional bone setters, could be queried, in the sense that if you have a long bone, that is broken and it's just a simple fracture, and you can join them together, then be rest assured that the bone will join together and heal by itself, even without you doing much. But what you need to do is immobilize the bone so that you don't put pressure on the bone, and the bone then gets dislocated. But when we're talking about modern management of bones, okay, if they want to find a way of incorporating, that's where it's important for us to have a general understanding and national plan on what we should do. If it's important for them to find a way of incorporating the traditional bone center, especially in the aspect of rehabilitation, because now once the bone is healed, some level of rehabilitation is needed in terms of returning to normal function. So now, if in the process of rehabilitation and sending the person back to the community, then that would be a wonderful thing. And in that wise, we can find a way for them, for those traditional bone setters to be involved. But they should not be the first point of call whenever there's a fracture, whenever there's a dislocation. They shouldn't be the first place of call. Okay. Then, in addition, the health practitioner themselves must be able to educate, even at the level of seeing person at the primary health care center, must be able to look at the risk of mineral loss or bone loss for anybody in their front, especially if the person is aged and having some condition, some health condition. You should be able to tell them specifically, these are the things you need to do to maintain the integrity of your bone. So, from the level of individual, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of exercise, in terms of whether you need vitamin D or calcium, okay, that is important. From the level of health practitioner to give advice appropriately and be able to do a medical checkup to look at the risk of any client, okay, of contracting bone problem.
Okay, I'd like us to quickly look at diabetes and then bone. I mean, we've had cases of some people, they say they get injured and it gets to a stage where they have to amputate their legs. So I'd like us to look at how diabetes can affect bones generally.
Well, we know that diabetes is a serious systemic disease that can affect so many organs of the body. But at the level of soft tissue, once you have injury and the sugar is not controlled, the wound will not go away. Infection will set in. We can have infection of the bone, which will cause osteomyelitis, okay? Which can be from acute osteomyelitis to chronic type. And then once the wound is not healing, to control the sugar becomes even more difficult. And then at the end of the day, you may not have choice than to sacrifice the leg so that the person can still remain alive. So that is the connection, especially in terms of the injury, osteomyelitis, and amputation. That is the key connection we find.
All right, we'll come take messages and feedbacks in a moment. Let us take a quick break. It's still Galaxy today. We're looking at fractures and dislocations. We'll be back in a minute to join us again.
The completeness of the fracture, the break, the orientation of the break, or whether the bone ends penetrate the skin. So position of the bone ends can be classified into two types. In non-displaced, the bone's position does not move. However, in displaced, as you can see by this diagram, if I draw it okay, you can see that the bone moves, and this is displaced because the bones are displaced after the fracture. The completeness of the break essentially means whether the bone completely fractured or incompletely fractured. So whether it incompletely doesn't break off or it completely breaks off. Now the orientation of the break, what it means that whether the fracture is on a vertical axis or a horizontal axis, also known as linear or transverse. Penetration of the skin is obvious. A fracture that penetrates the skin will cause a compound fracture, and one that does not penetrate the skin will cause a simple fracture. Okay, let's just learn more about bone fractures. Let's just say a kid fell down and broke his fibula or tibia, for example. So now, what happens to the bone? Let's zoom into the bone and learn how the fracture repairs itself. So here is a bone, a typical long bone. Contains the periosteum, which wraps around the bone. This is the fracture. We have the compact bone and the hollow tube, which is formed by the compact bone, and we also have the spongy bone. We have blood vessels here, and blood is formed and accumulates in the body. This is just after the fracture. However, a few seconds, minutes after the fracture, we have major swelling. Here's a fracture again. This stage is known as the hematoma stage, or where the hematoma formation begins. And essentially, the hematoma formation is when blood accumulates, forming the hematoma. And this causes a death of some cells and swelling and pain associated with the area. And as you can see, the vessels are damaged here. After
All right, welcome back. It's still Galaxy today. Doctor, we have some questions for you. Murphy from Alausa. I always have wrist pain. Please, what can I do? This one, before you answer that, this one says, Good morning, all. I am Glory from Ikotun, Lagos, 45 years old. My right knee for the past 6 months swells up anytime I walk or sit for a long time. What do I do? Maybe take both of them. Swells up and she has pains each time she walks.
Okay. The basic.
Or when she sits too.
Yeah, the basic thing is this. The background information that she has not divulged in terms of that. Was there any injury to the knee before now? Okay. If there had been a trauma to the knee, and then how did she treat the trauma when it happened? Now, because she could be having just a monoarthritis, just an inflammation of that singular big joint, or she could actually be having some other issues with it. What she needs to do essentially is that she find her way to see a doctor. They need to do a proper examination and look at the extent of swelling, any other loss of function, and then the doctor will now probably order some tests. It could be blood tests. They could actually be looking for rheumatoid arthritis or something like that, or it could be an X-ray to see what is happening at the level of the joint. So that one will determine the kind of intervention
to be given.
I know that it's difficult to see doctors nowadays because you have to go there and stay for quite a long time. But anyhow, it's worth it because if you have deformity from that leg, she won't like herself.
Okay. This one says, I woke up one morning and I observed pain in my shoulder up to my back and neck. What should I do? What do I apply? Nigerians are always wanting to apply things.
Yeah, again, most likely, if you are just waking up one morning and experience pain at that point, most likely, the way you slept, probably, you slept probably on that joint and then that happened. What we tend to advise is a simple stretching exercise as the first thing. Okay, stretch the joint. Simple motion exercise regularly can restore the joint.
By motion exercise, what do you mean exactly?
No, there are critical. There are exercises that you can do that will, sort of improve the mobility of your joint. Either you move the joint outward, or you move it backward, or this, or you rotate it. Okay, if you do that regularly, for some period, of course, that can actually help.
Okay. Ayomide from Aja says, I have been limping for the last 2 months now as a result of playing football for a very long time. What is the cause and what should I do because I have treated it before?
Again, if you play football and you are not limping, most likely injury. That's why we said that most of the bone conditions, including fractures, are preventable things. If you had injury while playing football, it is important that part of the team, the team doctor should be able to look at it exactly and decide what you need to do. You see some of those your star or hero you see in football, they say they're going to be off for 8 weeks or so, or 3 months to allow proper healing. You cannot have an injured joint and then still putting that joint under stress. So you need to seek a proper advice and know how long you need to keep the joint at rest to allow proper healing before you then start using the joint. So if you are still limping and having that problem now, you still have to go and do a proper assessment of that joint. So that, and the way you do proper assessment is to take your time, just dedicate 1 week to say that you want to see a doctor specializing on bone. Somebody will easily refer you to one around the corner.
All right, more questions. I have dislocation in one of my fingers and it is really affecting me, finger dislocation.
What you want to avoid is that we don't want the stiffness, we don't want the finger to get stiff because if you don't manage it properly, you see that tiny joint will become stiff, okay? So most of the time, the first thing is to encourage movement of that joint, of that small joint. Either you use your hand to move the joint frequently and regularly, maybe like twice in a day, morning and evening for some time, okay? And then you still need to eat healthy because without moving the joint becomes stiff, and then you need to eat healthy. If the thing is becoming more tractable, We may need to do a tiny X-ray of that joint to see exactly, have you really lost the joint? Is there any other thing you could do in terms of the joint? And then, of course, a medical practitioner will refer you appropriately to
Okay.
do an
Okay,
X-ray
maybe
and
before
get
we
the
take the next
Yeah, go ahead,
question,
Katrina.
I'll just saying, you said eat healthy. What are those foods or what are the tips you can give when it comes to eating healthy? I know people say milk is one of it, but
Yeah, milk is very rich in calcium, and but again, you know, milk is expensive. If you prepare vegetables and fruits properly, you know, you get quite substantial amount of calcium from those things. Of course,
What about taking
bony
oral
milk.
calcium drops?
Yes. But before you go there, you see, for me, I really prefer we eat our food as medicine. You know, because if you look at your variety, instead of going to the extent of taking, you must have such a serious deficiency of calcium for somebody to say, okay, take oral calcium, take vitamin D if you are in powder. You know, you are covered all over and you are not coming out. So, but we should attempt to eat our food as our medicine. So we have varieties of food that we can pick from and then, you know, take, and then the nutrients will be delivered to our system if we're not having a problem with absorption. So yeah, that's the thing. Of course, those things with bones, you know, bony meals or bone, you can grind some bones.
What about eating bones?
Yes,
Like,
that's
then
what
parents used to encourage us to
yes,
eat bones.
yes, because it's very rich in calcium. Of course, that's the richest source of calcium. Anyhow you look at
Any
it.
bone
oh really?
Bone, of
or
course.
brisket bones.
The bone is made of calcium.
Okay.
Okay, so
Won't it affect our teeth for those of us who don't have
no,
brisket
they're
teeth?
soft bone. They're soft bone. I'm not having to go and buy the bone of cow. So, you know,
I just need to confirm.
so you know, so as much as possible, try to get your calcium from or your